Welcome to Fabian's Zeitgeist. I'm your host, Fabian Kira, mechanical engineer by training, global observer by obsession, and professional overthinker by default. This podcast is my way of decoding current events, economics, politics, and the societal ripple effects that shape our world. I'm not here to pretend objectivity. I've lived, learned, and accumulated biases like anyone else. What you'll hear is my unfiltered perspective, honest, flawed, and open to contradiction. As Socrates once said, I know that I know nothing. You do disagree to my opinions. That's good. It means you're thinking. So, no matter where you are, no matter if you're young or old, a woman or a man, you're white, black, Asian, blue for all it matters. If free speech and unapologetic thinking are your thing, then welcome home. With that out of the way, let's jump straight into today's topic. Today's topic is again a complex one. I will talk about asylum and migration, with all the deriving versions like immigration, emigration, and remigration. I'm a migrant myself. I moved from Romania to Germany in 2011 in search of a better life. Unlike others though, I've been fortunate. I'm the kind of migrant no one seems to object to. I've had a good start in life and a decent education. I have a good job, I pay taxes, I own a home. I speak the language here reasonably well, and I don't stand out visually. Well, perhaps a little, since I'm not blonde or blue-eyed. But contrary to the myth, most Germans aren't either. So, for my wife and me, integration was relatively smooth. We were warmly received and can even say we've made a few close friends. Not just acquaintances, but real connections. So, am I a German now? According to my passport, yes. But that doesn't mean I've erased my former identity. It means I've changed, maybe I've evolved. Some things I've kept, some I've lost, and some I've blended. What do I mean by that? If you listen to the first episode of this podcast, you already know something about my past, my childhood, my upbringing. Those experiences will always shape who I am. They're my foundation. What have I lost? That's harder to name. Maybe a sense of humor? But more seriously, I've lost my sense of grounding and identity that comes from having deep roots, deep family roots where I live. The sense that I understand not just the words that I hear, but I get the deeper meaning behind the words, because I share the same past and experiences with the people around me. What did I blend? The easiest answer is the language. Together with my wife, we developed our own communication way, our own language if you want, since we are no longer able to communicate in a clean language, no matter which one this should be. We are not talking clean Romanian, we are not talking German between ourselves, we are also not talking English, but we are mixing everything. We are mixing Romanian, German, English, Italian, some Spanish, and heck, my wife even throws in some Hungarian into the mix. But this is where I draw the line, since I'm not able to say too much in this language, or what I can say cannot be repeated in a podcast. Good, but now I've talked a lot about me again. Let's go back to the heavy stuff. So what is migration? What is immigration? What is emigration and remigration? Migration refers to the movement of people from one place to another, typically involving a change of residence, either temporarily or permanently. It encompasses both internal migration, movement within a country, and international migration, movement across national borders. Migration is a broad term that covers various types of population movements motivated by diverse reasons such as economic opportunity, safety, education, or family reunification. Immigration is a more specific concept. It describes the act of entering and settling in a country that is not one's country of origin. Like in my case, I immigrated to Germany. Immigrants are individuals who leave their native land and become residents, often with the intention of permanent settlement in another country. Immigration is always viewed from the perspective of the receiving country, while emigration with an E is the act of leaving one's country or region to settle permanently in another. It's the flip side of immigration. While immigrants arrive somewhere, emigrants depart somewhere. To simplify, I immigrated to Germany and I emigrated out of Romania. Remigration, or as it is currently here in Germany pronounced Remigration, refers to the process of returning to one's country of origin after having lived abroad. This can occur after a period of work, study, or resettlement in another country, and might be motivated by personal, economic, or political reasons. So, with this, I think we clarify the terms. Now, let's go down the path of history and see if we are talking about something extraordinary that we are living today in terms of people migration, or is it just a normal way of things? The prehistoric humans, the almost human looking apes, began migrating out of Africa around 1.75 million years ago. I will not go into details here, as they were not in the habit of writing too much, so beyond some bones, there is little left to document this. The next migration wave out of Africa was somewhere between 50 to 70,000 years ago. However, you might believe that humanity was created by God in His image, much closer to our time. Even so, the Bible presents a clear example of migration. Adam and Eve, the first humans, were forced to leave the Garden of Eden and seek refuge elsewhere. Their story marks the beginning of humanity's long history of displacement and search for sanctuary. The early movements were driven by climate shifts and resource scarcity, curiosity and exploration. During Neolithic Revolution, once farming was invented, people started migrating in search of farmland. The Indo-European migrations around 2000 before Christ spread languages and cultures across Europe and South Asia. The Greek and Roman colonization, they established cities across the Mediterranean, spreading culture, governance, and trade. In medieval times, we had a Viking expansion between 800 and 1100. The Vikings reached Britain, Iceland, and even North America. Some of them raided and then went back to Scandinavia, but some settled and contributed to the creation of new nations. The Arab migrations between the 7th and 13th century. Their aim was to spread Islam and Arabic language across Middle East and North Africa. But they were also reaching Europe, where most of the Iberian Peninsula, what we know today as Spain and Portugal, was at one point under Muslim rule, and the territory was called Al-Andalus, which some say is how the Arabs called the land of the Vandals. And to make things even more tangled, the Vandals themselves were a German people who were pushed by the Huns from their original home base in Central Europe, probably modern-day Poland. Then we had the Mongol migrations, who not only resized the population of the planet, with approximately 10% of it dying during this migration, but also had some positive effects, like remixing the population gene pool, creating trade networks to link Asia and Europe, and spreading scientific developments, medical, and artistic knowledge, eventually influencing the Renaissance in Europe. Since I'm in Germany, but I come from Transylvania, I have to mention also the Ostsiedlung, which was the German eastward migration during the 12th to 14th century into modern day Poland, Bohemia, Hungary, Transylvania, the Baltics, and parts of Austria and Slovenia. In the age of exploration and colonialism between the 15th and 19th century, we had the European colonization with massive migrations to the Americas, Africa, Asia, and Australia. The transatlantic slave trade forced the migration of roughly 20 million Africans to the Americas. During the 20th century, the two world wars displaced tens of millions across Europe, Asia, and Africa. By the way, the first formal discussions about the right to asylum in international law began as a consequence of the Second World War during the UN Refugee Convention of 1951. The partition of India in 1947. This caused 14 million to migrate between India and Pakistan. More modern migration waves, the post-war labor migration. Workers from former colonies or other friendly countries moved to rebuild Europe. For example, Turkish workers in Germany, Algerians in France. During the Cold War, political refugees fled Eastern Bloc countries. After the Cold War, we had the westward migration of Eastern Europeans in search of better employment opportunities. Where are we now in the 21st century? The destabilization caused by the multiple conflicts we had so far in this century, like the global war on terror in Iraq and Afghanistan, the civil war in Syria, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the human catastrophe of the war in Sudan that has resulted in the last 3 years in the displacement of 14 million people, the Rohingyas in Myanmar, and unfortunately the list is not complete, have produced large refugee populations. Other reasons why people choose to migrate include climate change, which is increasingly driving displacement and intensifying global migration pressures. The internet, social media, and the advances in communication technology have created new type of jobs. Take, for example, podcaster, YouTuber, vlogger, and so on. And the technology enables remote work and new forms of mobility. Nonetheless, economic migration and asylum seeking are the two main reasons, creating also the most debates. Economic migration is driven by the desire to improve one's standard of living. Economic migrants move to another country in search of better job opportunities, higher wages, or the chance to provide for their families. Their movement is voluntary, and while their decisions are often born of necessity, they are not fleeing imminent danger of persecution. Asylum seekers, on the other hand, are people who leave their home countries in search of safety. They may be fleeing war, violence, persecution due to race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group, or political opinions. International law, especially as outlined in the 1951 Refugee Convention, provides asylum seekers with certain protections, including the right not to be returned to a country where their life or freedom would be threatened. And here is where I need to vent. In a recent episode of Paul Ronsheimer's podcast, he spoke with Nicole Lange, one of Germany's top experts on Eastern Europe. I was stunned to hear them discuss the idea that Germany should help Ukraine enforce its forced conscription laws here in Germany. That Ukrainian men who fled the war should be pressured to return and fight. In my view, this goes against everything the right to asylum stands for. If someone escapes a war zone and reaches safety, they deserve protection, not to be sent back into the meat grinder. If this is truly the direction we're heading to, then what does the right to asylum even mean anymore? It risks becoming a hollow promise, just a story told to comfort the ignorant. Right, back to the story. Though both economic migrants and asylum seekers cross borders, the circumstances, their legal status, and the rights afforded to each group can differ substantially. However, while it might seem a clear cut, it often isn't. In order to explain why I think it's not easy, I want to tell you the story of Elvis. I met Elvis in 2021 while on holiday on the Greek island of Corfu. Eva, my wife, organized as she always does the perfect holiday, with a bit of city sightseeing, a bit of lazy sitting by the pool, a lot of great eating, and maybe a few more bottles of wine as we would normally drink during the rest of the year. And as always, she found a very nice hotel where to spend the lazy part. Elvis, a black man from Nigeria, worked at the hotel where we were staying. Together with Annie, an extremely friendly and capable Brazilian hostess, they managed to gather the smooth operation of every facet of the hotel. From reception duties to staff management, guest pickups, breakfast service, maintenance, local recommendations, and reservation handling. Annie and Elvis were the backbone of this establishment. Elvis, according to his own account, had no formal education. Yet he spoke flawless English, very good Italian, having worked for the Italian company that owned the hotel. His local language from the Lagos region of Nigeria, and based on his life story, I guess he had at least a basic understanding of some Arabic. So he could find his way around at least in 4 languages. He was also quite proficient with computers and the internet, not just for entertainment, but for work and social media. At around 40 years old, Elvis was self-taught, resilient, and deeply intelligent. He had endured a difficult life, the details of which he shared in fragments. Stories of hardships and perseverance, of leaving his home in search of safety, stability, and opportunity. His journey, like that of so many migrants, was motivated by the hope for a better life. He sought employment, dignity, and a place where he can raise a family. But before I met him in Corfu, his journey brought him first to Libya, from where he hoped to find passage to Europe. There, he was taken in by a local, not really as an employee, but in conditions that felt disturbingly close to slavery. While he labored under exploitation, Libya descended into civil war. His so-called employer was a supporter of the Gaddafi regime, the ousted ruler. One day, revolutionary militias stormed the property and killed everyone on site, branding them all as Gaddafi loyalists. Among them were countless black African workers. Caught in a conflict they neither chose nor understood. In their eyes, everyone there was guilty by association. Elvis was also shot, but he survived. The mother of his daughter and his close friend with whom he started from Nigeria were killed there. I must say I was happy that Elvis finally made it to Europe, that he was able to provide for his family and his daughter left behind in Nigeria. I was, however, disturbed by the darkness I saw behind his eyes. Probably it's PTSD. It's understandable considering the trauma he lived through. But nonetheless, it was unsettling, as it was not easy for me, a European used with safety and peace, to understand. I also felt happy and proud when my adoptive country decided to take in first the Syrian refugees and later the people fleeing the war in Ukraine. It seemed like the right thing to do. I wish it was easy. The refugees and also other migrant groups from Afghanistan, Iraq, Somalia brought in their own culture, their language, their religion, their trauma and biases. We have, of course, plenty of situations where integration worked and people are contributing in a positive way to the development of our society. It's not so much talked about it, and it's not making headlines. To the reality belongs, unfortunately, also that the migration caused criminality is on the rise. We have imported anti-Semitism, local social systems are under pressure, and the social cohesion is crumbling. People here don't understand anymore why their efforts are not recognized and appreciated, and especially why talking open about the issues comes almost automatically with a stamp of neo-Nazi, right extremist. More frustrating, the ruling establishment seems unable or unwilling to solve them. Criminals with no right to be in the country are tolerated to stay and continue to commit crimes. Law-abiding and tax-paying people are fearing for the safety of their children and wives. In this context, we experience in Germany a rise in the pushback. Newton's third law of motion states that for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. And yet, we act surprised that for the lack of effective action from the ruling parties, we see now an increase in voting for the others. Of course, integration is never a one-sided effort. As a migrant, you can only do so much. If the local population is not really willing to accept you as one of its own. And exactly the acceptance door is now closing, and fast. You might say, this is not a problem. If they don't like it, they should go back, right? These are the calls for remigration, remigration. Let's go down this lane for a little. In a previous episode on aging and retirement, I touched on the growing concern, the shrinking workforce in Germany and much of the Western world. It's not just a demographic shift, it's a call to action. We need new contributors, we need fresh energy, we need people stepping in to help keep these gears of the economy turning. And that's where the first generation of immigrants come in. They arrive with grit, hope, and the strongest desire to belong. But the path isn't easy. There are language barriers, physically demanding jobs, and the weight of unfamiliarity that makes integration challenging. So what they do? They hold tight to their customs, traditions, and relationships, those anchors of identity that help them navigate this new terrain. They stick together as a group, and they don't really integrate. This happened also with the workers from Turkey, who began arriving in Germany at the beginning of the 60s. Initially, the workers were expected to stay for 1 or 2 years under a rotation system. But it's easier economically to keep the people once they are trained in the job, once they speak the language and their productivity increases. So many ended up settling permanently and raising families. This in itself is not an issue. I don't want to oversimplify, and I fully believe that politicians and philosophers could debate this for decades. But the deeper challenges often arise with the second and third generations. These are individuals born and raised here, who know no other homeland but this one. Yet many find themselves living in what feels like a parallel society, shaped by distinct customs, social norms, even legal perceptions. Their worldview, influenced by a different religion and cultural understanding of identity, gender roles, and community, often clashes with mainstream expectations. So, of course, tensions emerge. It's understandable they question why they're not treated as they are fully belonging here. And when neither side makes the effort to bridge the divide, the gap only widens. What may start as mutual curiosity or tolerance can, over time, harden into misunderstanding, even hostility and radicalism in the worst cases. Being a migrant myself, I can intimately relate to the hopes, hurdles, and heartaches that come with trying to build a new life in a new land. But I can also understand the wish and the push in certain countries or from more conservative parts of the society to safeguard cultural identity and national cohesion. In Europe, nations like Hungary and Poland have faced marginalization for taking that stance. Mainstream media often vilifies them, painting them as regressive or intolerant, which can further polarize the dialogue. The rise of AfD in Germany, Le Front National in France, Fratelli d'Italia of Giorgia Meloni in Italy, all reflect the same underlying blowback, a reaction to perceived loss of control, identity, and sovereignty in a rapidly changing world. But this isn't exclusive to Europe. In the United States, a parallel debate is unfolding, marked by an intensifying divide between Democrats and Republicans over how to address immigration, from border policies to deeper questions of belonging and national character. I wonder if by trying to do right by everyone, we are not actually increasing the pushback and alienating everybody. I don't have a solution to this complex issue, but I have an observation. Japan faces the same issues we are facing in Western Europe and the US. The population is shrinking and aging. At the same time, Japan is one of the most restrictive countries in regard of migration. Yet nobody seems to complain. Yes, the government there has cautiously opened the country through programs like Specified Skilled Worker SSW, but permanent residency remains rare and conditioned by very strict adherence to the rules. Isn't this, in the end, a fair approach? It's a transactional model, but without changing the identity of the nation. Japan doesn't pretend to be a melting pot, and in that clarity, people know what they're signing up for when they are migrating there. To end on a less serious note, stay grounded, unless you decide to emigrate.
Hi guys, it's Eva, Fabian's better half. At least that's what he calls me. So, did you enjoy the podcast? If you did, go ahead and hit that like button. Even better, rate it and subscribe. That way you'll be notified as soon as new episodes drop and you'll be helping others discover the show. If you'd like to support Fabian's Zeitgeist, you can do so by donating via the PayPal link, which is available on the podcast's website, www.fabianszeitgeist.com. That's FabiansZeitgeist. Your contribution helps ensure the continuation of the podcast and keeps the conversation going. Also, don't forget to leave us your feedback. It helps shape the direction and quality of future episodes, so feel free to share your thoughts. Until next time, stay critical, ask questions, form your own opinions, and be ready to change them if you hear better arguments. Fabian always listens, eventually, especially when I tell him he's wrong, which is often. Alright, bye guys.